I am Ingrid LaFleur, and it is such a pleasure to be here at Republica. And I'm very excited to engage in this wonderful conversation with Will Senyo and Armen Avanessian. Did I say it right? Okay, awesome. So, do you guys want to introduce yourself? Welcome to Detroit, by the way. Is this your first time? Yeah, good.
Yeah, first time here, and probably too brief a visit anyway. I think I would return later. But my work, I'm Will Senyo. I'm based in Accra, Ghana. And if anyone knows their Pan-African history, you know I come from a strong heritage of Africans leading liberation. So I'm here connecting on multiple layers beyond Republica and all that. I'm eventually going to meet a few more African Americans in this community. But my work, at the core of my work, is trying to embolden a new generation of African young innovators who are trying to shape a new narrative. So bold thinkers in technology, art, social impact, and trying to create a home for them to do their work uninhibited, and also become activists of a different kind. So people trying to shape new narratives of the periphery of our city.
I'm Armen Avanessian. It's the first time I'm in Detroit, so thanks for having me, by the way. What brings me here is that I have a talk on Monday, for which I'm actually more prepared, I fear, than tonight's event. But I think the reason I was invited or being on stage with you is that I edited a book on futurisms, on ethnofuturisms in plural, like Sino-futurism, Gulf futurism, Afrofuturism, and others. And maybe what I'm interested in is why, I mean, we all witness, whether in the US or in Berlin where I live, kind of like shift towards the right also on the level of discourse, a certain normalization. Topics that were completely normal to talk about 10 years ago now seem like extreme left, nearly terrorist, and so on. So there's a kind of normalization going on, and also a kind of hegemony of the right in terms of discourse. And one of the concepts that is taken hostage, I would say, is the term future. So I was interested in this ethnofuturism as means or attempts to reclaim the future in a certain way. So that's why I edited some stuff about it without being really an expert, but that's somehow why I think I'm here.
Awesome.
We only have 2 microphones, that's why.
Yeah, I know. So I am a curator of Afrofuturism. I'm really interested in applied Afrofuturism. How do we implement it to solve real-world issues? And I like to focus a lot on using visual culture to really unpack and investigate those ideas. And so I have an exhibition that's up right now at Library Street Collective called Manifest Destiny. It closes October 5th, so if you haven't been, please go. Thank you. And yeah, so I'll just let's begin. I'm really into creating equitable futures, and I'm really interested, Will, when you talk about how you're really shifting narratives, well, how does that come into play when creating equitable futures?
So when I got this invitation, partly because the people of Republica, I think, love me, but also because I think they think I have actual views on this. So I want to believe it's the latter, not just because they love me. But I decided I was going to be a one-string banjo of sorts on this panel and try to harp something that I'm beginning to feel very strongly about, and it's this idea that to even create an equitable future as a collective, a friend of mine is currently developing a concept that I don't think is fully formed, but I think it's interesting enough to warrant time on this stage. And it's this idea that to even first talk about an equitable future, we first as a society have to decide what ideas come forward as we build our future. How do we select the best ideas to shape our future? Now, that would determine how equitable our society could be. And he has a concept where it talks about the mental latitude imperialism, this idea that depending on which latitude on Earth you were born on, some of your ideas will actually not make it to the mainstream. Now, that from day one means that there's a small group of people who are continuously going to shape our future. So if you were born in Accra, Ghana, the likelihood of your idea actually shaping Western society is next to zero. Now, that idea in itself means that as a collective, very few people will shape our future going forward. There's a reason some of the ideas that dominate globally tend to come from Western societies. It's not because the best ideas exist only in Western societies. It's because as a collective, we've decided that those are the ones who will elevate above all else. So a specific example of this is even in American and European society, where there is things like, how do we track fake medicines in a large value chain where counterfeiters are doing weird things and are killing us? Or how do we make sure that horse meat is not parading as beef in Europe? There are technologies on the African continent that cracked this 10 years ago, but are not mainstream in America today because of this exact question of how ideas actually emerge and shape our society. And that, eventually, I'm seeing more and more of that going into things that are actually then affecting our own futures, because ideas are increasingly tied to capital. Now, if your ideas don't get the most capital, it means they don't go mainstream, which means that people in certain parts of the world will continue to have ideas that won't go mainstream and can actually affect their own livelihoods and how their future emerges. So for me, it's also a question of, as a collective society, having this ingrained in our minds to understand that the way we pick ideas to elevate can actually shape our collective future. And as it is now, we are picking more and more from other parts than we are picking from some parts of the world. So if you're from where I'm from, your ideas are likely not going to actually shape the future. And that is a very stark view to have, especially given that we believe that there's a level playing field today, thanks to the internet.
So I have a quick question. Considering population growth, so right now, Africa has the largest population of young people, and by 2100, 1 in 3 people are going to be African.
Yes.
So right now you're just discussing like a distribution, but then also how we're programmed to kind of choose a certain kind of Western aesthetic and ways of communicating. What does that mean, though, when the population is growing at such a large rate, a fast rate, and the West population is actually on a decline, so is China's? Do you think that it can eventually shift over time?
So the population issue is a blessing and a curse, right? Currently, it's more of a curse than most people like to believe. One of the big things, and I'm beginning to actually understand how to shift this narrative slightly, is that I think as a people, Western societies respond more to fear than anything else. So to shape that narrative to get African attention or focus on what the challenges on the continent, one of the things we're exploring now as Impact Hub in Accra and all of that, to feed into this push, is Western societies must understand that it's actually in their best interest that the best ideas also come from the continent. From one perspective, building a front line of innovation capacity that can actually safeguard our society. And one of the best examples I've seen in that, to establish that idea, is when the Ebola crisis hit globally. We realized that something as far away from America can actually break down American economies in a very short time. Now, if you don't let ideas that emerge on the continent take shape to the form that they are mainstream and can actually become the front line to solving some of these problems, it's actually not in your best interest. Airports get shut down, things happen that actually are in your detriment because you've not actually helped elevate big ideas that can actually solve these problems. So the population question, as much of an advantage as it is, the bigger disadvantage is that when crisis hits, it's also going to affect billions of people, and it's snowball impact on Western society is going to be really massive. So I feel like eventually what we have to agree is that an African society that is able to build ideas to a point that it's mainstream is not just in the interest of African societies. It's actually also direct interest of Western society, and that is why we should be working together to elevate ideas in a way that we can all win.
Oh, I definitely agree. Yes. So, Armen, do you want to comment on what he said?
Actually, I also have questions to you. We just
okay.
met like 10 minutes ago, and we decided somehow we moderate each other. But so far, apparently, Ingrid took over. For the dynamic on the panel, I unfortunately cannot disagree with William. But you were I can add something maybe about both the population thing and you mentioned somehow reasons of power and the latitude thing, which is also race issue, and why good ideas or progressive ideas don't make it in a way. What I would add in a way is to say that it's not just these power dynamics, or it's also technological reasons. So we live more and more, because we're on a panel on future, we live in a complex society in terms of, what I mean by that is a society that is governed by computers, by automation, by algorithms, and that implies that we're governed in a way like from the future. We have predictive analysis of our behavior. We have, I'm sure that's also an issue here, preemptive policing, that produces certain realities based on assumptions about the future behavior and so on. We have preemptive wars. Saskia Sassen was just talking about financialization. So the whole derivative economy is another example of like future assumptions about the future actually having an impact on the present. So this is one of the elements why progressive ideas or progressive like attitudes do not have any fruition, or that they don't have enough of an impact. And about the population thing, I would like to say that this kind of economy also that is so dominant produces more and more of what sociologists call like a surplus population. So many of us, and also like in the benefiting Western like societies, more and more people are not necessary. They cannot be used, they become surplus for those in power, for the economy. So this is something we also have to take in mind, that more people doesn't mean more power, it means just more unnecessary. I do not mean that in a cynical way, but from those in power, they don't need them. They don't need them as factory workers to produce anything, because there's a financial economy that works like without producing in many cases, or without like workers. These are just two things that I wanted to say, but now my moderator come through. What I would be interested in what are the futurist or Afrofuturist like strategies or tactics or modes of working, that could intervene, or how do you use them, or how to mobilize them, Well, you can choose another. You can ask yourself a question. I just try to.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, gosh, there's so much that was going through my head when you were speaking. Elon Musk and Jack Ma were at a conference recently, and of course Elon Musk was like, AI is going to take over, and it's going to basically enslave us, and that's probably because he's creating that kind of AI. But they both agreed that they need more population growth in China and in the West. And I was wondering, and they never mentioned Africa, even though Elon Musk is South African. And I was wondering, are they saying this in order to prepare for the fact that there is a large African population growth, and they might think that there's a power shift? I didn't really understand why they wouldn't even mention Africa, and maybe even China's investment in Africa. So I found it very strange. I do think that humans are necessary in terms of innovation and how we're cultivating and creating our futures. From an Afrofuturist standpoint, we're not going to only be technical. We're definitely going to have a deeper connection to the earth. And I believe that our fight for, water rights, and climate change, all of these things are really kind of shifting and moving us towards paying attention to Earth, and having maybe this kind of balance between tech and this natural world. Although someone recently said, human is nature, therefore all that we create is nature, which is very interesting thought, because I really do separate the tech from us. But when you do think of AI, it is coming from us, right? We are giving birth to it. I do believe that in terms of, as a result of this connection to the earth, and Detroit is a really great example of this, then we're going to be more co-creative and collaborative. And I am speaking very much from a Western point of view. And we are looking at tools like blockchain technology that can further support that level of organization that's necessary as we move into the future, so that we can create our own economies that aren't tied to global economies that have affected us, and created these recessions and depressions that we're still seeing the legacy of today. So, I do think that the tech will help us if we know how to use it and we're exposed to it, in terms of how we grow. But I do see that the future, the Afro future, to be very exciting, actually. And as a Black American, I'm definitely not afraid of Africa's population growth. I'm like, finally, I'm here for it. It's about time. But I do think of that as I talk about this often in Detroit, and then I'll let you speak. When I was growing up, you didn't really know who was African or Caribbean. There was a Black American assimilation that was happening. And now, at my age and younger, the visibility of Africans who are here in Detroit has just exploded, and it's amazing. Brendan Asante was just here moderating a panel who does jerk and jollof. Over 1,000 people show up, a Caribbean and Black American and African descent. It's amazing. And so with that, I'm saying that it is happening, that we are connecting, and that level of assimilation is going away, thankfully. And with that visibility comes the cultural visibility and different ways of thinking. And those Africans who are here in the United States have, the dual, that at minimum, dual perspective that I think really can create that connection, and that gives us a stronger bridge into a future, into the Afro future, that will bring about more prosperity for all of this wonderful growth that's happening on our continent.
And I mean, try to just like jump right off of that. The idea of African kind of identity and what it means and all of that, and how that is going to shape the rest of the world, translates into something very specific for me, which is that there's never been a better time to be young, African, and talented, right? There's an opening in global dialogue now, and it may not be happening in all spaces, but at least it's happening, that allows for African ideas to emerge and come forward. It's most prominent, fortunately and unfortunately, on the creative, cultural side of things than it is maybe on technology, but it's the opening into other things. So if you look across the spectrum of even American music today, how much of American music is currently shaped by Afrobeat? You'll be amazed about it. Now, it's the first opening into taking space and expanding into other things. And so for us sitting on the other side, say, okay, it's not necessarily the ideal direction would have gone, but the fact that Zanku is danced in Detroit basement clubs is an indication of a global shift of what people consider acceptable. Now, if we can latch on that, then we can go into every other thing. Now, at the same time, it feeds into something that for me is quite interesting, this bipolarity of the conversation, which is that on one hand, things that for hundreds of years were considered African and therefore backward are somehow emerging into the zeitgeist as the most exciting things. So what was considered indigenous and not as forward thinking is now the most amazing thing, right? So if you look at food and how people are beginning to, their relationship with earth and all of that, these are things we were doing thousands of years ago and somehow were considered backward. Now, to save the earth, we've had to go back to African ideas as to the relationship between us and Mother Nature, as they used to laugh at us with our relationship to the earth. But it says something about those two things living, coexisting in the same space and not being contradictory. That you can actually relate to technology, at the same time have a deep respect for the earth and how to maintain it. And we've tried, in kind of preserving some of these ideas to the point that now, if you look across, some of the ideas that they are sharing around, yoga and life-work balance and food, and it's just like, these are not new. They're just old African ideas for us that have found new language to express them, and also place them in capitalist contexts that are more exciting because there's money to be made. But we did these things not from that perspective. It's just from deep respect for the earth. And so that bipolarity, I don't understand it. How we can have Google and have these ideas merge at the same time and coexist in our society. I don't know where that is going to go, but I'm happy to see that Western society is slowly now catching on to some of these ideas.
Yeah, I just honestly believe that people are tired of being colonized, and they want something new. And colonization stripped us of our connection to the earth and to the cosmos, to the spirit, to ourselves, to a point that now we are doing the yoga and doing all these, meditation classes, and we're trying to figure out how to come back to. But as a Black American and as an Afrofuturist, Afrofuturism gives a really beautiful portal to that which we've been denied access to and intentionally have not been taught. And I think that is what is so exciting as a Black American specifically, because it's like, yes, I get to finally embrace and incorporate all of these wonderful ideas and understand that there's a global community that is supporting that and trying to expand all those areas and ideas.
Just a short comment, because we were talking a lot about bipolarities or polarities. I don't know what the expression was. Like, one that we didn't talk about yet, but we should at least have in mind is the one that there's this ideology also partly in Silicon Valley also of the cloud and immaterial labor, or even transhumanist fantasies talking about population, that we there's a way of living and thinking without the physical, without the body, and which is also the reason for the climate change, the mess we're in, basically. And one thing we didn't mention yet is really the material basis of this the development and AI and everything, namely resources, right? So the iPhone is there is no cloud, these are resources that are to a high degree. I mean, my iPhone is made in China, as we know, but the resources come to a large degree from Africa. So there's an ideology of the non-corporeal, in politics, but also in the industry itself, in the kind of industry that that governs and doesn't let through certain ideas. So I just wanted to stress that it's not just ideas coming from let's say Africa, but it's actually the material comes from Africa. So it's a weird paranoid or schizophrenic situation, because we have here I see the title. I mean, you also guess, yeah. The Odyssey and the Cross-Continental. We are somewhat used to think of there's one center, and a lot of political discussions are is the US going to stay the center, or is it going to be Africa? or is it going to be China? The question is for me more, what if for the first time in capitalism, or in the last 500,000 years, there is not just one center? Because we had the US, I think that's over, but we had the UK, we had before, I don't know, then it was France. No, it's not. I mean, like, if you think from the future, I mean, it's obvious, right? And the current regime is just accelerating this decline, which is not bad, which doesn't mean that people will have a bad life in the future here. But we approach it, the question is less like, will China take over, or one African country, but like, what does it mean that a certain economic and political system called capitalism, which is based on someone takes the profit, someone else in the semi-periphery like constructs the cars or the iPhones, and someone even more like far away, you know, produces the resources. When that is when this capitalist like scheme is falling apart, by having more than like just one center, you know. So that is the.
But Armen, I like where you're going with that. I'm not sure how far ahead you've thought about that, but if there is a potential shift in how the world views capitalist power, and it's not always central, and so then one at a time, you can't have two, right? So there's a reason that US-China war is ongoing right now and all of that. It's this idea that it has to be one and it has to be central. Now, if it's not so, and there's place for every, as we say, cross-continental future, what is the potential likely outcome of all of this? How do you see this multiple nodes connecting? Because I don't see it. I don't see how we move from this to that potential cross-continental future where there's multiple nodes and everyone is playing to their strength, and there's no real tension between all of them. Do you see that as a possibility at all?
I'm a philosopher. I just have big questions. I have no answers. You know, I've absolute failure, zero when it comes to that. But I mean, think it of like science fiction as a better approach to reality. You know, like quite some people said that. I try to see like the present like from the future, and maybe I'm still under the impression of like Saskia's talk before. I think we are no longer even in capitalism. You know, like in 30 years time we will see that this has been over in 2007 or whenever. You know, that doesn't mean that communism or whatever something positive started, but a certain economy dissolved or is dissolving in front of our eyes. So for me, the question is rather like, so how can we make this productive, and to what degree? And this is for me a question of like recuperating the future. Like how can we like also as like political theorists and activists like really practice science fiction? You know, like act on the present, like from this assessment that this Western-centered like universe and economy is actually already over. Just let's ignore it, you know. Like let's build something else with the self-confidence that it is dissolving itself anyhow. We do not even need to do a revolution, you know. Like they're doing it themselves, right? So it's a very abstract thing to say, but I'm here for the abstraction. I'm the philosopher. You're the activist.
So
I put you again in the activist.
Oh, I love abstraction. So a couple things. In thinking about capitalism, it's definitely fed by free and forced labor, extraction of resources. So until those kinds of oppressive systems end, I don't see an end to necessarily capitalism, because there's still going to be people making money off of that, right? So, you know, I'm really for the abolishment of capitalism in its totality and a creation of new economies, and this is why I'm into blockchain technology. It's a technology that is decentralized and distributed, so there is that opportunity to hopefully even the playing field, and it's a system that allows for each individual to have control over their data, or even be paid for use of their data. It's a system where you can have community-developed economies that are based on their own value system. So I think I'm always thinking fractally in that if we focus on the hyperlocal and creating more resilient systems that really reflect our community values, then hopefully on a fractal level, it can be replicated on up to a global scale.
That's an ideal, very ideal outcome. My only fear for that is that every time as a society we've thought we've had a way of equalizing, some people hijack it every single time. And blockchain is one of those things that provides that potential for equalization all over again, but we know for sure that it's going to be hijacked again because of what?
It is being hijacked.
It's because
right
of
now.
just, to Armen's point, just that capitalist society and all of that. My fear now is that if we take the same outlook and that outlook that the technology itself would somehow equalize, we'll fail miserably. We have to curate with deep intent how the technology actually then does equalization. And I'm not seeing enough of that. There's a lot of focus on the power of the technology to do that, but not enough focus. I mean, democracy was supposed to be one of the things that changed us. It's been hijacked all around the world in a way that doesn't actually benefit the masses. And I think technology is just one other tool that could be hijacked all over again and then disenfranchise significant populations around the world. So I am on the cautious optimist when it comes to the power of technology to liberate and all of that, believing that it can only happen with deep intent and curation.
Well, I think you're right. Technology is definitely a tool, so that's why we have to decolonize our minds, because it does determine how we use the tool, why we're using the tool, and even the creation of that tool. So a lot of the people who are constructing blockchain technology come from a place of ideas of scarcity and competition. And they talk about how their ancestor comes from these caves and it was cold, the Neanderthal, right? But my ancestor is Dinkanesh. She's 3.5 million years old and found in the Ethiopian region. And so she comes from a place that is fertile and abundant, which for me means also co-creation and collaboration and community. So, you know, I think all of these things in terms of our perspectives, our origin points, that has to shift. And hopefully it can do it simultaneously because the tech is being made and being used really, really fast. And we're already kind of behind. Do you have a closing idea, thought, philosopher?
About, I mean, leave us, we're ending already?
Yeah, we're ending already.
Okay.
She's got her card out.
Humanity must, no,
Okay. Oh, there's Q&A.
yeah, Q&A, that's brilliant.
Wait.
No, let's do Q&A.
Yeah, let's do Q&A.
We moderate the Q&A.
Microphone. Oh, nope. Anyone?
You guys were thorough.
You all were pretty thorough. When we think about blockchain technology and Afrofuturism, what uses do you see that, particularly with blockchain tech, that can further Afrofuturist ideas or ideas rooted in Afrofuturism? I don't know if it's a failure of my personal imagination, but sometimes I don't make the connection between the uses of blockchain technology outside of things like Bitcoin. So how do you all see, as panelists and as thinkers on this level about the future, how do you see blockchain technology being used?
Well, I'll just use an example of a project that I'm working on. Right now, 40% of Detroiters don't have access to broadband, and 70% of our youth. So as we're talking about moving into the future, we have to make sure that people have access to these resources. That is only the beginning of having access to more resources, right? And so for our project, it's called Detroit, we're looking at a way to create a token that could pay for mesh networks that have been going up in Detroit. So a mesh network is basically a satellite on a house, and a signal will bounce to another satellite on another house about a block away. And in between, you can have access to the Wi-Fi. And this has been going up in North End, in Southwest, in Highland Park, Island View. It's really exciting. But the person who with the satellite is actually kind of paying for it out of the goodness of their heart. And so this is a way to kind of like help support people and have access to the resource, but we want to create this digital cooperative so that people who are token holders actually have a say in what happens with the token and that economy around it. We do want businesses, local businesses, to accept it so that it creates a parallel economy. But there's something very exciting about individuals actually voting on like what the inflation rate will be and what we're going to do with it, and who has access to the token. And so, you know, that right there, I think, is one really great example of how blockchain technology is not just about like, you know, recording transactions, but it also creates this level of organization and transparency. So that means everyone in the digital cooperative can see all the finances, everything that's going on with the token, and there's administration that gets paid from this DAC, Decentralized Autonomous Community. Do you have an example?
Just have a quote. William Gibson, the famously sci-fi science fiction author, he said like I forgot the quote now. Yeah, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So that's the thing I wanted to really underline or stress, that technology is never the solution, but like you cannot have a solution without technology. So it's all, and what you said is a good example. It's all about how can you politicize, you know, like who owns the technologies? Is it used in a progressive way or not? So this is just I wanted to say, because before we're talking about technology and how far this leads. So when someone says like this and that technology will solve it, like whether it's the free market or whether it's like the internet or whatever, it's a good example. What you said is it's always ideology. It's never true, because it's unevenly distributed, and it needs to be recuperated and used in favor of people and not like whoever makes the money.
By the way, what were the numbers you shared again? How many young people in Detroit don't have access?
70%.
Oh, Accra is not bad. Our numbers are way less. If I, we have Google Fiber in Accra. Yeah, Afrofuture. To your question, what the like specific use cases could be. One of the really exciting ones I've seen blockchain technology get used for in Ghana. Historically, we know that wealth is tied to land in most societies, and much in America, more stark than ever, you realize that the wealth gap is also shaped by, you know, the transfer of land post-slavery and all of that. In Ghana, there is mass group of people who somehow have a relationship to land but don't have ownership of it. And over time, it actually influences their earning capacity, because they can't use land as collateral for loans of some sort. And the new technology that has enabled them to be able to have a land registry blockchain on a blockchain that allows them to then access microcredit. And as small as that is, you know, it's tied to geolocation, mapping it out, all of it on blockchain technology that can be accessed by multiple banks, institutions, and all of that. changes the direction of their lives significantly, where they are now able to access loans to grow bigger farms and all of these things. So it's a small thing to use a small technology, technology like blockchain to figure out, but the potential impact is really massive. And more, we are seeing the use cases like that that affect mass populations. And I think when we think about it, we should not always think about it from perspective of making money, but it's also how it enables people live better lives and have access to things that otherwise they wouldn't have. We are using it in identity, ID systems, and all of these things. In places where there's no legacy systems, there's a real opportunity for these technologies to shape new things and build bring groundbreaking ideas. And that's the exciting part of this conversation around Afrofuturism, that we are not hitched to like heavy wagons, like in Western society, where there's entrenched legacy systems that are really difficult to break. On the African continent, there's an opportunity to shape things from the ground up, if only you know how to navigate political landscapes. That's the only challenge. But there's no real, the capitalist power tied to legacy technology systems are not as strong, which gives us new opportunities to shape things that then, if they are great, can actually feed back into Western society if you allow it. So Yolanda says, cut it out, it's over.
Oh, it's over? Are we?
Anybody? Last question? You got another one? All right.
I'm sorry to be the question monopolist. My next question is about ideas of security within an Afrofuturist framework. I hear a lot of ideas that are fantastic. I hear a lot of discussion of issues that deal with economy. But I think security is becoming a really significant issue, even in terms of what futures can and should and might look like. What types of discussions are going on, or do you think should be going on, with regard to security as we think about what the future is going to be and perhaps should be?
Thanks for this, and I can only speak again from a
Short
very
answers.
Purely African perspective. I recently met a Nigerian professor with a very, very dark view of security on the continent and how there's going to be a ripple effect of one country, Central, that I won't mention, but you're allowed to guess, is going to have an implosion, and that implosion is going to disrupt the entire West Africa and then feed into Central Africa. Very stark model, but to your point, it's very, very much at the heart of this whole conversation that we can't talk about prosperity and all of these things outside the context of how young people on the continent are likely going to be a huge security risk across the board. And if we are not deeply intentional about how we manage that, we're going to have a society that is both prospering, but also highly volatile at the same time. So you can't disconnect an emerging Nigerian African giant story from a potential complete implosion of that society and how it affects everyone else. So those two conversations are actually very much connected. From where I sit, unfortunately, I don't think there is enough happening on that side of the conversation. There is a certain leave it to the forces as we focus more on economic empowerment. So, and I can understand it. It comes from this idea that you can't do all of it really well and succeed. So there's a strong focus on the continent of elevating people from poverty and providing economic access and all of these things without really having another conversation about how security risk could actually derail all of this. And so from where I sit, I don't think there's enough happening on that front. I think we are just trying to be optimistic on that side without any real strategy to it.
All right, on that note, we're going to end it here. Thank you so much, Will Senyo and Armen Avanessian.
Ingrid LaFleur.
LaFleur. Thank you, guys.